You don't really appreciate cash when you work for a big company. You don't really appreciate cash when you work for a small company that's successful.
Yeah.
You appreciate cash when it's running out, because what is cash, right? Cash in a business is time.
Yep.
No cash, no time.
Yep.
Best ideas, doesn't matter. You don't have cash, you don't have time, you can't implement them.
Yep.
So the critical nature of conserving cash, building cash, was clearly the lesson of the turnaround year.
Hi, John.
Seth,
What's up?
it's so nice to see you. We have been friends for a very long time.
It's crazy. It's really, I don't like to think about how long. And I think I invited you to your first ever Hanukkah party.
There's no question about it.
Yeah. I don't remember what you received, but I remember it was fun.
It was a little dish that you could put candies or nuts in,
Oh, no.
and it is still being used at my home.
That's fantastic. I think people really get Hanukkah wrong. Can we just, by the way, everyone, welcome to Diners and Deals. This is John Barrett. I am Seth Deutsch. Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us. Okay, now back to Hanukkah. You know, I think that I believe in 8 presents. One is really good. And like, then there are socks, pencils, and you got to open one a night, almost kind of like, elephant gift exchange, whatever. But like, that is how I still like to do Hanukkah. We do. And we celebrate, we have Christmas, we have Hanukkah, we do all the stuff. But I think Hanukkah is a ton of fun. Who doesn't like to light the menorah?
Well, that was my one and only Hanukkah experience.
Oh, is this, wait, that feels like a little bit of guilt. So are you saying you want to come back this year?
I haven't been invited.
Okay. Well, this actually, it's not going to be this year. It's going to be next year. You know, I have written an album called A Very Hanukkah Christmas. I've taken 8 Christmas songs and rewritten them as Hanukkah songs.
I've sampled a couple of those.
You have?
Yeah.
You have.
Yeah.
I'm going to do a live band, not this year, but next year, because I'm going to a different concert this year. But next year, I'm going to do a live band Hanukkah party on the first night of Hanukkah party. And the name of the fake band is The Big Jew and the Not So Big Band, because I am 6'7" and Jewish. And we're gonna do the album. So
do you know what I say to that, Seth?
Huh.
I say Mazel Tov.
Yes, that's right. And we'll drink some Manischewitz. We'll have a good time. You know, we'll spin the dreidel. It'll be fantastic. And who knows what type of present you'll get? You just don't know. So, man, we met. Is it 15 years ago?
Has to be.
It's got to be. You were at the time on the board. Were you the chairman, vice chairman at SMS Assist?
I was actually Mike's vice chairman.
Okay. That's right. At SMS Assist, which was the first unicorn in Chicago, from what I recall.
You know, I think that's true,
Yeah.
but you can't hold me to it.
Okay. Well, that's how we met. You have just had an incredible career. Tell me what you're doing. Tell our listeners. I know what you're doing.
Yeah,
Tell
but
us
first of all,
what
do
you're
you
up to.
remember who introduced us?
I do. Oh my gosh.
So I'm not sure I do, but I'm pretty sure it was Matt McCall.
It might have been.
Pritzker Ventures.
Yeah. It was definitely a connection.
It's like, you got to meet this guy.
Yes.
He's interesting. Anyway, yada, yada.
Yes. And I was at AECOM at the time.
Right.
Still doing the big corporate thing. You had made the shift out of big corporate, which we'll talk about. And what are you doing today? Tell us about the organization.
So today, and I have been doing this for 10 years, Seth, I'm the chief executive, the executive director of an organization called the ISSA, and that is an acronym that doesn't mean much today, but I run the trade association for the worldwide cleaning industry. It is a 503(6), which is a not-for-profit classification enjoyed by trade associations in the United States.
Fascinating. And tell us a little bit more about that organization before we go way back.
Yeah.
And what it is today and what it was when you started.
So these organizations are fascinating because they really, their purpose is to lubricate commerce for the industries they serve. So the cleaning industry is an enormous global industry. I think it approaches $1 trillion. Our association is the biggest of the big. We have 11,000 member companies in 130 countries. We do events in virtually every continent. We have offices all over the world. And our job is to help the people of that industry move ahead. And unlike most trade associations, which focus on one part of the supply chain, we're the whole shooting match. So it's the manufacturers and distributors and reps and end users and contractors. So it is a really interesting community.
How did you get into this?
So I was recruited after I retired from a company called SMS. And I told him, Seth, I'm like, look, I am not a not-for-profit kind of guy. I'm a businessman, but they convinced me that the work mattered.
Yeah.
And I replaced a guy that had been there for 25 years. He replaced a guy that had been there for 25 years.
Wow.
So I was the third guy in 50 years of a 100-year-old trade association.
Wow.
And honestly, from that moment to this day, it still feels like the greatest honor of my career.
That's fantastic. What was the membership when you joined?
About half that.
Wow.
Roughly,
Just and how well we'll get into that. And so you are not then quite yet halfway through your journey there.
Oh no, I'm retiring. I'm retiring in October on my 67th birthday.
Stop it.
I will remain on staff as chairman emeritus, but 10 years is enough time for anybody to run an organization. And I'm delighted to tell you that my successor is coming from within the organization.
That's
We've
fantastic.
got 2 candidates that have been in development for 3 years.
Wow.
And our board will select one and we'll move forward.
Exciting. Well, let's go way, 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 way back to before you and I ever met. Where'd you grow up?
Elmwood Park.
Nice.
Elmwood Park, Illinois. Elmwood Park, the first suburb to the west of the city of Chicago. It is exactly 9 miles from the center of the city.
And what was home life like? What were the early years like?
I grew up in a really loving household, Seth. My mom was a princess. My dad was a tough Irishman. But we lost him. We lost my dad when I was 14 years old. And it was devastating to our family because my mom had never worked a day in her life, right? So here she is with 4 kids. And I got to tell you, she figured it out. Yeah. Although the boys, there are 3 boys and a girl, the boys could do no wrong.
Of course.
Like there was no discipline because that would imply that somebody actually needed discipline.
Of course.
And not in my house. One of my favorite memories was we went to Fenwick High School, all of us, on scholarship. And you had to wear a tie to school. And so my brothers and I would dress up clownishly. We'd wear striped pants and polka dot shirts and, plaid ties. And we'd say to our mother, Mom, how do we look? And my mom would say, oh, you boys are so handsome. And my brothers and I would just shake our heads, say, no, mother, we look like clowns. So, but thank you. But it was a house that was so filled with love, Seth. You can't imagine.
Yeah, I can, because I know you and I know how, and I feel your love, and I know your lovely wife. I know many of your kids, and you've just been an incredible friend to me, and I've seen how you treat others. So I'm not surprised.
Well, back at you.
Well, thank you. So through that experience, I believe you were an Evans Scholar. I've got another friend, Mark Ritchie. He's the only other Evans Scholar that I know. So what did you start to envision for yourself as you were a teenager going through high school? What did you envision that life would become for you? What did you want for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, life was pretty simple in Elmwood Park. I mean, you can't imagine just how one-dimensional it was. And people didn't really think a lot about the future. They thought about next week, next month, next year. But working at a private country club for 7 years, watching Mr. Keith Stewart drive around in his Mustang Mustang convertible, orange with the racing stripe.
Wow.
I thought, this is another way to live, you know? And I really wanted to be like them.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't know what that really meant at
Sure.
the time. I just knew there had to be a better way than trying to scrape together enough money for gas in the car, enough food in the fridge.
Yeah.
And there's no tiny violin playing, but life was challenging for
Of
our
course.
family. So seeing this, it was a shining city on a hill for me.
Yeah.
And I think what it did was it just made me dig in, because that's all we had, right? You gotta just, so I from that moment on, Seth, I worked as hard as anybody I ever met.
Yeah. It's interesting, my wife, Nadia, they immigrated to the US when she was 14 and, first came to LA. They didn't speak a word of English, right? It was her mom, Nadia, and her brother and sister living in a 1-bedroom apartment. Her mom didn't like the schools of all things in California because they were repeating math and science they had learned in Iran.
Wow.
Like 2 years before. And she had met a woman, I believe at either Ashland or Marathon Oil, playing mahjong in Iran with one of the expats who lived in Columbus, Ohio. And so that was the only person she knew. She's like, come to Columbus. It'll be, better experience. And, Nadia, there was a house in Worthington where they were living, kind of up on the hill. It was probably let's say today's world, a $300,000 home or something of that nature. And she was just like, I want to live in a home like that. Like, I want to live like that. And that's part of what, it was that connection. And I see us now and her now in the home, that we're building.
Oh yeah. Your beautiful new place in the desert.
Yeah. And it's like, I see this finally, manifesting, for her. Not that we didn't have homes along the way, but she also is a fast car girl. So anyway, like was a car, I'm just curious, like that Mustang, but like when you first got like that big first paycheck, and I think you went into a program at Xerox. We'll get to all that.
But Seth, there's always a car.
There's always a car.
And the first great car was a Toyota Supra, which is an amazing
automobile. Yeah. But was that a big, that was a big thing for you? Huge deal for me. So let's understand what is an Evans Scholar? Like I did not know about that until I met my friend Mark. You're the second person that I've met.
So the Evans Scholarship is the largest privately funded college scholarship in America.
Wow.
Every year they give out approximately 1,000 free rides to college. It's an incredible organization, and it's reached its flywheel effect, because something like 50 or 60% of the funding comes from alumni.
Wow.
So it's given to kids who are academically strong, financially needy, and were golf caddies.
Yeah.
And the program has continued to grow and strengthen, and it's really golf's favorite charity. But one of the stories I love to tell about it, Seth, is when I was interviewing for the scholarship, one of the trustees asked me where I want to go to college. And I said, well, I want to go to Michigan. And the trustee said, Michigan or Michigan State? And I said, I didn't know there was a Michigan State. So I said, Michigan. And the trustee said, why? And I didn't have a reason, but I blurted out, well, because Michigan's business school is superior. And they were like, oh, that's a pretty good answer. And so I went to Michigan.
There you go.
As I love to joke, Seth, if it wasn't for the grace of God in that moment,
yes,
I would have a degree in animal husbandry from MooU. So no offense, a lot of my friends went to Michigan State. But it's one of those points in your life, right?
Yep.
Where the smallest thing sets you off on a path.
That's right.
And my path could have been different. I'm not sure it would have been any worse or any better. It just would have been different.
That's right.
And I think that's one of the 3 moments in my life where my path was set.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about your experience at Michigan. What was that like for you?
Michigan was interesting. I was a pole vaulter. So I was a pole vaulter at Michigan for a couple of years. And that was a nice experience until I figured out that I wasn't a very good athlete. The really good athletes were on scholarship at Michigan.
Yes.
But it was a point of pride, I suppose.
Yeah.
Academically, I know this is going to sound like a commercial, but Fenwick High School, Park, Illinois, prepared me so well for college that college was easier than high school for me. And I studied economics and speech.
Wow. Amazing. And then as you were going through that, what did you imagine you would do when you graduated? What did you?
So I ended up not going to the business school because I knew I wanted to go back and get an MBA.
Yeah.
But I did have an aspiration to go to school overseas.
Okay.
And my dear friend, Michel Laliberté, Canadian guy, went to school in Switzerland for a semester through, of all places, the Kent State University in Ohio. Because Michigan wouldn't accept the grades, they would only accept the credits.
Yeah. My
buddy and I took 30 credit hours in one semester.
Wow.
Well, we figured we could pass anything.
Yeah.
And spent most of our time on a Eurail pass, visiting the various countries of Europe and only showing up for school on Thursday, which is when they tested. And what that meant is when I got back to my senior year, I only needed 8 credit hours to graduate. That, Seth, was the year I bartended.
There you go. Mm-hmm. And what did you learn from that experience?
Well, I learned that you can give away too many free drinks for your friends,
true.
and
this is true.
You get shit canned.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so, as you're coming out of the program, what did you set your sight to do? What were you thinking? Your life or your career was going to become?
1981 was a tough year, for hiring. So I did get a job offer from IBM. I just wanted to work for a good company, a big company. So my list was IBM, Xerox, Procter & Gamble.
Okay.
So IBM offered me a job. The problem was it was in Orange, New Jersey. Didn't want to live in New Jersey. Procter & Gamble didn't give me the time of day. And Xerox was where I ended up going to work because I have a brother, Tony, who works there. And my interview consisted of me driving to Chicago, meeting the regional manager saying, "You're Barrett's brother? Yeah, you can work here. No problem. Do me a favor. I'm busy this afternoon. Go to the bar and I'll be ready for you around 5 o'clock. Just tell him it's the Talbot tab. He'll know what to do." And so I said to Mr. Talbot, I said, "That's great. But, I actually have a friend who I drove to Chicago with. His name is Mike Flynn. Could he interview too?" He goes, "Oh, no, we'll hire him too. He's fine. We'll hire him too." So Mike and I sat in the bar and drank for 5 hours. And then the secretary walked down and said, "Good news, the regional vice president is here and he wants to meet you guys."
Oh, fantastic.
So we go back upstairs. We're shit-faced. Mm-hmm. We're absolutely shit-faced. And he's asking us questions. We're giving one-word answers. Yes, no, maybe. And he says to us, "Have you been drinking?" And we said, "Yes, but John Talbot told us to go down." He goes, "Oh, it's fine. Don't worry about it. You'll be fine here." So my introduction to Xerox was very different than my introduction to IBM.
I bet.
But, and it was in Chicago, and I wanted to be in Chicago, and I wanted to work with my brother. It was the most comfortable beginning to a career you could have.
Yeah, amazing. And how did that? Tell us about your time at Xerox. How long did you?
So Xerox is a remarkable organization. Yeah. This is when companies trained. And if you can imagine, they sent you to a place called Leesburg, Virginia. And for the better part of a year, they wouldn't let you talk to a customer until you were fully trained. Now, it wasn't a whole year, Seth, but it was a good long time. So that's where we learned the way, the way. And by the way works, They chose very few things to manage. In fact, what they told us after the fact was they really only look for 2 qualities in their people: intellect and energy level.
Interesting.
They figured they could teach everything else. So it was a great experience. I had a new job every year, eventually got into management. At one point, I had the top sales team in the country. Ask me why, Seth.
Why?
Because they were women, all women. And as we all know, women are way better in business than men.
It's true.
No ego, high EQ. Yep. And these young women were really impressive.
Amazing. And some point in time you left Xerox.
Well, yeah. So remember the Evan Scholars we talked about?
Uh-huh.
So I was up for this big job at Xerox. I interviewed with this guy and I said to him, he says to me, John, I've got all these tenured people. Why should I hire you? Mike Martone. And I said, Mike, you should hire me because I am always going to make you look good. And Mike said, we're done here. You can leave my office. I am not interested in looking good. I am interested in being good. And he showed me the door.
Wow.
And I was really bummed out because I thought, well, fuck, that's my big break. I'm not going to get the job. And he calls me that night and says, congratulations. You got the job. And I said, Mike, I'm so confused. I thought I failed our interview. He goes, I was just giving you a hard time. He said, in fact, I've been tracking your career since you were in high school. And I said, Mike, how is that possible? He said, I was one of the trustees that voted on your Evans Scholarship.
Wow. And
I've been keeping an eye on you ever since. Because there's only one thing. If you take this job, you have to promise me you'll go back to business school.
Okay.
And we'll pay for it. So Xerox paid for my MBA at the University of Chicago, marking yet another gift of education, and one that, obviously creates a deep sense of deficit.
Yep.
And to repay Mike's kindness, Seth, no sooner had the ink dried on my diploma than I quit. But I had to, because I wanted to run something, and it was going to be years and years and years before I could navigate the corporate world. And I just wasn't up for it.
When did that inkling, and I want to dive more into wanting to run something. Yeah. Right. So what was the drive? What was unsatisfied, or what was the itch you needed to scratch? What did you want? What was lacking at Xerox? And when you say to run something, what does that fully mean to you?
Okay, so at Xerox, you get to manage small pieces of big businesses, right? You don't get to run anything. You get to monitor small pieces of big businesses. And I learned a lot, right? But I wanted more responsibility. I wanted more accountability. And I've never even tried to articulate it, but I guess give me the ball. Right?
How did it show up in you? Where do you feel that? Because I know you, and I know the feeling, and I can almost feel it like viscerally. Where does that hit you physically when you say? Oh,
that? It was so frustrating to work there sometimes, because you didn't always have a great boss. You didn't always have the ability to move the needle. You were in a box, and that's the nature of these companies, right? They're really good at boxes, Yep. But I don't know. It used to actually drive me crazy. I bet. Right? That I didn't have more agency. That's the word I'm looking for. Yeah. I wanted more agency to kind of do it differently, because I thought we'd get better results, but you didn't have.
You can't change the system, and there's nothing wrong with this, right? Yeah. Like, some people fit, like that is the perfect place for them. But I imagine that it was very constraining, because you mentioned two things, which is interesting, right? In their model, right? Intellect and energy, right? Were these the two things that you mentioned, right? And sometimes that intellect, right, comes with great curiosity, right? And wanting to tweak, and wanting to develop, and wanting to create, and wanting to do things differently. But some systems just, that's not what they need, right? Like that, the intellect can no longer be contained in a box.
And I think that's true. I think I would add to it. There's just, didn't Charlie Sheen used to do this crazy meme thing called winning? Winning. I just wanted to win. Yeah. And I think that's from a life of sports, right?
Absolutely.
You just want to win,
Trust me, I know all about it. Yeah. So you quit to go where?
Well, I wanted to run something, like I said. Yeah. And as it turns out, no one will let you run anything unless you have experience. It's like being a bartender. Nobody wants to hire a bartender that doesn't have experience. So I actually ended up finding something broken to run. And it was a company called Ogden Allied or Ogden Services. They no longer exist, although they were given the worst governance in corporate America 3 years in a row by Ford magazine.
Wow.
Forbes magazine. Yeah, it was a really poorly run company. But they had this division in Chicago that did contract services. And this is the first time, Seth, that I've been introduced to the service industry, where I will spend the rest of my life.
Welcome to my world, from Eden to services and the rest of my life. And they had this little business that, that needed work. And as it turned out, I learned after the fact that the CEO said to my boss at the time, look, we need to try something. Go hire somebody from IBM to fix this thing. And apparently no one from IBM was interested. And so I took the job, And again, it was in Chicago, which I get it.
As I look back, turned out to be really important to me. I've only lived in one other city my entire career. I've spent the rest of my career living in Chicago.
Yeah. So let's talk about your transition from the machine and the way to this services division of Ogden.
It was the Wild West.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to tell the story about that I told you before this, because my children might be listening. But the chaos that ruled this company in this industry, I learned was normal.
Yeah.
Right. So everything from lying, cheating, stealing, ghosting payroll, you name it. Oh, okay. So this company did a lot of different things. It did mechanical maintenance. It did cleaning. It did security. And I was, thrust into all of it. So I had to learn quickly what it was all about. Well, the first thing I learned about the cleaning industry was it's a labor-intensive, repetitive task business.
Yep.
But it's just regular people, right? These are normally immigrants, hardworking people, and in my year, Polish and Spanish, but they were deeply respectful people.
Yep.
It's very interesting. And I learned quickly that the better we treated them, the better they treated our customers. So I loved our staff. I thought they were great. I made it a point to learn their names whenever possible.
Yeah.
So that business was really easy to understand.
Yep.
Then went to the mechanical business. That was hard for me to understand. I'm not an engineer. In fact, that is a union-driven business like nobody's business. And so after I took over, I got a call from the secretary of the head of the union who said, come downstairs, there's a black car waiting for you. Mr. Phelan wants to meet you. And John's passed. Tim Phelan's passed. I called my boss and I'm like, who's this guy that wants to meet me? And John says, get in the car. So I went downstairs. I am seated in the back of this car. There was a goon to my right, a goon to my left, a goon in the front seat, and a goon driving. And they drive me 3 blocks to the Union Hall, where I sit in the lobby and wait for Mr. Phelan to see me. I waited for 4 hours. I'm getting irritated. I'm getting agitated, but I know my boss told me to sit there and meet Mr. Phelan, so I wait.
Yep.
I finally get into his office. He has his shirt off. He is punching a heavy bag and he's sweating profusely. And he says, welcome to Chicago, Johnny. And I said, thank you, Mr. Phelan, but I've lived here my whole life. He says, tell me, John, how is that beautiful wife of yours, Anne, and those children, Emily, Jack, and Amanda? I'm curious, how are you? How are they? And I knew he was trying to intimidate me.
Yeah.
So I said, Mr. Phelan, fuck you. And he looked at me and he slapped me on the back and said, we're going to be just fine. So apparently I passed the test, but they run an incredible shop. The engineers are the best run union I have ever come across, and I've met a bunch of them.
Yeah.
So that business works beautifully, right? Now we have the security business. Our primary job was prisoner transport for the U.S. Marshal.
Wow.
Right? I don't think I know a lot about this either, but we had a guy that ran it and he was fine. So he went into the hospital for a heart attack, right? And so the business was a little in disarray. one of the employees had to do payroll and through just an accident figured out that he was ghosting payroll,
Wow.
ghosting guards. And it wasn't just for some office building. It was ghosting payroll for the U.S. Marshal.
Wow.
So I got hauled in by the FBI to explain why we were doing this. He ultimately disappeared, made a credible threat against my family. For 3 months, I had 24/7 armed guards. So it was, like I said, this is my first year in this industry.
Yeah.
And it was nuts.
Yeah. How long did you stay there?
Long time, a long time. So I had a lot of friends that watched my journey, and I would tell these stories, and they would say, "How can you do this? Like after you got your MBA, you got this, you got that," and I just said, "I don't know. I wanted to see if I could do it first of all, and then once I had spent 2 years there, and that is the magic number, by the way.
Yeah,
if you enter the service industry and you survive for 2 years, it's very difficult to leave it. And the primary reason for that, Seth, is that an individual can still make a huge difference in a human-based service industry.
Yeah.
And that's what I tell people.
I agree. So where did you, and how, so you 2 years to incubate and doctorate, get your hands around this. And the same thing happened to me. I fell in love. I thought I was a product guy.
Right.
Yeah. And I was. And it took me a while, and I just fell in love with the service business. So how long did you stay overall?
I stayed a while. So 7 years later, we sold the company to a Boston-based firm called Unico.
Your division or
the whole company?
Okay.
The whole company. Yep. So I didn't want to go along with that deal, Seth. I wanted us to buy it as a management team.
Yep.
But my fellow managers were afraid of losing their jobs. So it was ultimately sold to this Boston-based company, Unico, for 3 times EBITDA.
Wow.
3 times EBITDA. So as it turns out, the new company couldn't close the deal without me because, and I'm not bragging, I'm just saying I ran a big part of the business, you know?
Yep.
So I told him I wasn't interested. I was going to go do something else. So the chairman at that time, he's also passed, flew his G4 to Chicago and said, "You're going to spend a week with me. We're going to become best of friends. You're going to love working here." And we flew around the country, Seth, playing golf. Florida, Denver, Pittsburgh, some of the greatest golf courses in the world. And I said yes, because I envisioned this is the next level for me.
Right.
I lasted 3 months. We couldn't get along. So I'd moved to Boston. I moved my family to Boston. We were screwed.
Yeah.
And this is a great example of everything happens for a reason, because I ultimately did find a job working for a small little PE firm whose specialty was turnarounds.
Okay.
It was a company called York Management. So every week I would commute to New Jersey, work, and then come home and try to have some semblance of a family life.
Yeah.
That was very costly. I did that for 3 years.
It's hard.
You know? But the blessing was during that period, I should tell you something about the company. There were only 3 people in it. There was a chairman, I was a CEO, and we had a CFO.
Yeah.
Everybody else was virtual.
Wow.
Right? And so during that 3-year period, we owned 18 companies.
Wow.
So during a 3-year period, I was CEO of 18 companies.
Amazing.
And I learned a lot.
I bet.
I learned a lot. But after we sold the last one, which was in fact a sizable company, it was a consumer electronics company. Can you think of something you would know less about?
Probably, but
I couldn't. I decided it was grueling. We spent a lot of time downsizing companies, laying people off. It's soul sucking. Turnarounds are, about turnarounds, Seth. So I said to my family, we're going back home. We're going back home.
Let me pause there for a second. As horrible as they are, right? And soul sucking as it is, are there any lessons that you carry from doing turnaround work that still stay with you today as you are focused on growth mode?
Yeah. And it's the importance of cash.
Yep.
You don't really appreciate cash when you work for a big company. You don't really appreciate cash when you work for a small company that's successful.
Yep.
You appreciate cash when it's running out.
Yep.
Because what is cash, right? Cash in a business is time.
Yep.
No cash, no time.
Yep.
Best ideas, doesn't matter. If you don't have cash, you don't have time, you can't implement them.
Yep.
So the critical nature of conserving cash, building cash, was clearly the lesson of the turnaround world.
I didn't learn it until I did my first turnaround with a small privately held business, because there was nothing along my journey. Even if I was doing turnarounds or restructurings as part of a very large corporation, or growing and scaling businesses, as you mentioned, within public companies, et cetera. You're not really dealing with, you're looking after AR and AP and these types, but you're not managing treasury. You're not right. You're not not truly, and it is the lifeblood. And it's the same thing for me. I am a hawk on cash. I am a hawk on revenue cycle now. I am a hawk on cash flow forecasting. I'm a hawk on FP&A now. Right. And, and I'm also a hawk. The other thing that I've done, because I've worked through so many recessions, and turnarounds, et cetera. I always have my contingency plan. And I always say to my teams, right? Like when the cycle will turn at some point in time.
Yeah.
Right. We will have a plan to button down, to restructure. We will have a plan to preserve cash and buy time and get through the cycle. I hope to hell we don't have to implement it.
Yeah.
But just taking people through the discipline and almost the scenario planning of the what ifs also really, I think, exposes the mettle of your team and the critical thinking of your team. And I'm seeing this happen a lot now. We're now dealing with you started working in 1981. I started working 1997, but I took on my first manufacturing job in 2009.
Wow. That
was a really, that was a very tough period. I worked for a company that had to lay off 40% of its global work.
Brutal.
It's brutal. It's brutal. But like the things I learned still serve me to this day. I don't like to have to implement that toolkit, but I'm now working, a lot of times with a generation. We are going to see a lot of bankruptcies.
I agree.
A lot of turnarounds, right, coming. And I get those calls today. I don't want to touch, I don't want myself or anyone on my team to touch them, but we are dealing with, the last 10 years, we're dealing with a generation of managers and executives where cash was free, growth was ample, and just a lot of folks don't have the reps.
But by doing the exercise you talk about, you figure out pretty quickly what's important.
That's right.
And that's the only thing you should be focused on, because
right.
Everything else doesn't matter, And I think there is one more lesson, by the way, of working in that environment, and that is the importance of not having B and C shares. Because you get introduced to something called the waterfall.
Oh, yes.
And when you're young in your career, you're like, I own 10% of this company. You're giving me 10% of this company. Boom. Yeah. I've made it. And then you realize you don't get paid anything.
Right.
Because the preference of the waterfall wiped you out.
These are not things, and it's so fun, but these are just not things that, unless you have mentors that have been in these situations, like there's nothing that in business school, at least when we went to business school, maybe they teach it now today, right? There's nothing that prepares you to understand these things. You get to learn through the school.
Did that happen to you? Did you get?
Oh, absolutely.
It's shocking when you actually look back and think, how dumb was I? But we just didn't know.
We didn't know, and we also didn't have the people to ask.
Yeah,
it's part of why we do this podcast. It's part of why we now give back, right, to entrepreneurs and share these lessons. So, because we don't want them to get burned the way that we did.
Well,
right?
but I mean, when you really go back and chronicle the brain damage of doing turnarounds,
Yep.
you realize that it's an essential experience
Absolutely.
to have as you're growing up. And you kind of talked about that. A lot of young folks haven't had that brutal experience, and you wouldn't wish it on your worst enemy.
No.
But I doubt you would be the manager you are.
Agreed.
And I know I would be a different manager. But you couldn't pay me enough money to do a turnaround that you couldn't pay me. It's that difficult.
Agreed. So that happened. 3 years in Boston. What was the next pivot?
Yeah, so I ended up still wanting to work in the service industry. The 3 years was basically a hiatus. We had vitamin companies and retail and manufacturing and consumer electronics. None of it was service related.
Yeah.
One small HVAC roll up. So I wanted to sort of pick for my next job. And I ended up talking to my friends in the industry. I ended up joining a family owned company, the Tarson family, lovely people, called Chemco. And they had this little jewel of a cleaning company. And it was only in 2 states, but the founder was a remarkable man, Elliot Tarson, and he had literally built the perfect service company. It was like 80p. Like every year their sales would grow a little bit, their margin would grow a little bit. They had extraordinary retention, high employee satisfaction. It was just a beautiful little company. And they wanted to scale. So they invited me in to help them do that.
What did that look like? All the other lessons, family-owned business. He's the founder. Any kids in the business?
Yeah, that was the tricky part, know, Seth, because Elliot had 3 remarkable children who worked in the business, but they didn't have my experience, And so when they decided to bring me in as CEO, I thought it could be very awkward for the kids. And I told Elliot, I said, look, this offer has to come from them, not you. I need to know they're bought in. And Seth, to their credit, they're incredible. Not only did they bring me into the company, but they supported me throughout my journey. Sure, there were times we needed to talk about stuff, but the support I felt from that family, including the kids, was, I think, really extraordinary, really unusual. I would say in most cases, I wouldn't advise someone to go to work in an environment like that because the landmines are everywhere.
Yeah. But
it spoke to their character.
Absolutely. And what about equity?
Oh, I got a really nice chunk.
Okay.
Here. And it wasn't B and C shares, Seth.
Right. Now, did he grant it or did you have to buy in or a combination
No,
of
it
both?
was granted to me. It was sort of, look, I had a price of poker, and I had a reputation and at that point I was sort of, I don't know. I don't want to say I was naming my price, but I placed a value.
That's
on
great. How much did the family give you?
It started out at 10% and ultimately grew to a bigger piece in that through an incentive plan we put in place. Yeah. So it was very generous.
Listen, that's fantastic. A lot of parts about that. I've got a friend working for a family business, and they've equitized him, and now they've equitized a number of the key people. Not all families do that.
I think it's very unusual.
Yep.
Very unusual. But I'm going to use the term again. Their character was extraordinary.
Yep.
And we designed the plan so that, look, if we hadn't grown, I wasn't going to get anything.
Of course.
It was 10% of the lift.
That's great.
But we had significant lift. And so everybody did very well.
So tell us about the journey. What did you do with Chemco? And what lessons do you want to share?
So this was actually a blast because it wasn't a turnaround, It was all growth, except for one period of time that is worth telling. But we grew organically from 2 states to 40 states, became one of the largest organizations in our industry. And we did it by trading on our reputation for quality. So
how many people did you go from and to in this journey?
I don't exactly remember, but in round numbers, maybe 1,000 to 10,000.
I mean,
employees.
that's pretty extraordinary.
Something like that.
Over what period of time?
This was over about 8 or 9 years.
And that was all organically?
100% organic.
So let's talk about cash.
Can
we talk about cash and funding the growth of de novo expansion in the services business?
So because the company was so well managed, we had cash.
That's good.
And the company, this is one of the little secrets of the cleaning industry, it generates cash.
Yeah.
So yes, when we have to start up a new operation, there's clearly cash going out the door. But we paid very close attention to terms, Seth. Yeah. And while the industry was on 30, 60, 90-day terms, I wouldn't do business with somebody that didn't pay me in 15 days.
Wow.
And it just became kind of a requirement for us. Now, there were exceptions, of course. Yep. But Seth, one of my biggest deals, this is heartbreaking almost, but there's a happy ending, was I got Kmart to give us all their stores.
Wow.
To clean. You can imagine the size of that.
Amazing.
I ended up building a consortium of 3 or 4 other firms to help us execute, but ultimately we had the con.
Yep.
And Kmart went bankrupt. And talk about sucking cash out of your business. It was so many millions of dollars. I don't even want to tell you. And so Eddie Lampert was running this bankruptcy. He had purchased the debt and used it to grab the equity, and he was taking a blowtorch to all the vendors. So we ended up being an unsecured creditor and being awarded by the courts 10% of our claim. So it was brutal. When it came time for, I think it was probably on the order of $7 or $8 million, which was a lot of money for a company like ours. Yep. When it came time for for us to get our 10% of the award, Kmart said, in order to keep working here, we want you to take half that.
Wow.
And we said, no, that's not fair. This is a court award. No, you can't do this. We need the cash. And they said, if you don't take it, we're going to fire you.
Wow.
Because what happens is if you're in a service business and you're in bankruptcy, that's actually a great time to work because the court guarantees your payment.
Right.
So my founder, Mr. Tarson, said, this is a matter of principle. We're not going to take that. Let them fire us. And they did fire us. So we went after them for our award. Well, since that time, there was a conversion. And I don't remember the details, but they converted. Oh, that's what it was. Instead of cash, they gave us equity in the new co. They converted the debt to equity and then only wanted to give us half. That's what it was, Seth. So it took us several years to adjudicate that claim. But ultimately, Kmart settled on the courthouse steps. And during that period, Seth, the stock appreciated 1,100%. So by not settling, and I take no credit for this, this was the founder, with clarity, we had a gain.
Amazing.
It's unheard of.
Amazing.
It's unheard of.
It's amazing.
I don't know how he found the strength to do it.
Yeah.
Because the family had to recapitalize the business.
Yeah.
But they had done so well over the years. They never hesitated. And that would have been a reason to fire me, by the way. Like the family could have easily said, John got us into this trouble. He's never going to get us out.
Yep.
But they stuck by my side. I think the world of them.
I'm sure you do. What did you learn about in that process? I'm curious, when you took on the Kmart account, what percent did that end up making up of the?
It was an uncomfortable concentration.
Yeah.
But it wasn't crazy. It was
20%,
20, 30%. We had begun to get scale.
Yeah.
At that point. Yeah, maybe 20%.
And listen, and it's a big national account and all these other things, and it can bring you into other national accounts. But what did you learn about, for other founders out there?
Yeah.
What did you learn about customer concentration risk?
It's the only way to start scaling a company. You're going to get stuck with a concentration. It's true here. It was true at SMS. It's inevitable because you can't scale.
You're gonna have periods of imbalance.
Yeah.
But ideally,
the second you get that customer, you have to work to diminish that P&L influence. It becomes the most important thing.
Yeah. And which is hard, right? Because
Oh.
you've got to service this massive
Yeah.
entity, and you don't want to lose it, right? And it's your reputation. But to your point, this is right when you double down on the next one. Now, some people will say, well, shit, how the heck are we going to staff this up, fund this growth, operationalize this? And now you want us to go immediately whale hunt for another?
It's essential.
It's essential.
It's essential. So if we can stay with this theme for a minute, two more small examples. So page ahead to SMS, our customer concentration with one client was 80% of our revenue.
Yep.
Again, credit to my partner for working through that nightmare. When I got to ISSA, we had one event. It was a trade show.
Yep.
That was 80% of our revenue and 80% of our profit.
Yep.
Guess what? We sold it. So the long-term presence of concentration is a bullet to the head for any business. It just, things change, right? Life change, things happen. You're never going to keep that customer forever, even if you are flawless.
Yep.
So working to eliminate that is the only way to win.
When you think about a service business, it could be janitorial, it could be mechanical, any of all the trades that and we'll get to the SMS story. I want to get to the end of the Chemco story, get to SMS, and then we're going to just kind of leave with some parting thoughts. I'm coming out with a book soon, called, I'm reluctant to do it, but I'm doing it. And the premise is selling to private equity. And it's really, written mostly for the blue collar industries and professional services industries that at some point in time in the founder's journey, they've decided they're not going to do a family transition. They're not going to do an ESOP. They're going to sell, and it doesn't have to be traditional private, but they're going to sell to a third party. Yeah. Right. And what we've done is we've reverse engineered private equity due diligence to basically be able to explain to founders, and we're going to see so much of this with boomers in small businesses, hundreds of thousands of small businesses next 10 years in the United States that are going to sell. About 30% are going to sell to third parties. The way that private equity or outside investors diligences an asset that then determines, and there are trade ranges for everything. Like
but it definitely determines whether you get the top of the range or the
top
bottom.
of the bottom, and deal structure, right? Are you going to be able to leave as a founder? Are you going to have an earnout? You're going to have to roll over equity? Is it untransactable? Right? And there's some really big things that are, there are just a handful of things that are really, really important. One of them is customer concentration. Mm-hmm. Right. And what I always say to service business, if you can get there, right, 2 to 3 years ahead of the sale, what you want is that 20% of your business is comprised of no more than 5 clients. Yeah. That's the dream. That's the sweet. That's the sweet. That is the sweet spot to get to top range of valuation. But customer concentration risk, big thing, succession, right? And cash management. For sure. These are the three. Growth, big, right? And growth, and of course, organic growth and
organic growth.
Yeah, one of the things that I learned at Eden, the playbook at Eden, was we always wanted to have 20% better margin than our peer set, and we wanted to have 2 to 3 times the organic growth rate of our peer set.
Top of the range.
These are just like fundamentals that I try to bring into all the businesses, but founders miss customer concentration risk because when it's just your business, that can be fine for you. Yeah. When you think about, if you think about transitioning that to your employees or to your kids, fine. Third party looks at these things in a very different way, right? Can have a big, big impact.
For sure.
So anyway, you guys worked through that and
well, at that point, we felt bulletproof.
Right. And then you had,
and we're lucky.
Right. See? And you had an 1100%,
we're lucky.
Yeah.
But, all kidding aside, Seth, we had a plan from the beginning. And the plan was to take this asset and provide an exit that the whole family could live with.
Yep.
And so
that was the plan.
That was the plan from the beginning. And again, to their credit, but we knew what we wanted to do was build a platform. There weren't a lot of platforms in our industry.
Yep.
And we thought it would be attractive, most importantly, to a strategic. Mm-hmm. What we didn't realize is that it was really attractive to a foreign strategic. Because at this time, the dollar was very weak.
Interesting.
So European companies, the euro was so strong, had a huge discount to buy American firms. And so that was our sort of idea. And it worked out. So we ended up selling to a company called Compass Group. Compass Group is the largest food and facility management in the world. They're incredibly well run. And they paid a huge premium to buy our platform.
It's incredible.
In the height of the financial crisis. Didn't blink. Didn't blink.
Amazing what you did.
No, not me. Just this incredible family, this incredible team. By the way, quick aside about the family. I'm stuffing my money into 100 different banks because I'm worried that the currency is going to fail. And I knew I was guaranteed for $100,000, literally. The Tarson family put all their money in the stock market, right? Huge gains. 2 years later, they pulled out. They had to be a double or a triple. And then they put all their money in residential real estate. Seth, these people are extraordinary. They're first of all, their tolerance.
Why didn't you just do everything they did?
Because I don't know. I should have. I did fine. But their aggressiveness in the face of risk to this day blows my. They took the nest egg and put it in the stock market. It was amazing, Seth. It's amazing.
Talk more about that, if you don't mind. What did you learn from their how they approached opportunity or what others might see as risk?
I gotta tell you, I think they just have. I thought I was bold. I wasn't. I was fearful. I was going to lose my money. But I think the old man in particular, I keep talking about him. He's such an extraordinary person. Had clarity and conviction, and I think he learned to trust his instincts through, at that time, he was in his late 70s, right? Again, right? The makeup of this person is really different.
So you sold the company to Compass and,
I didn't last there very long.
How are you supposed to? It's another box.
It's another huge company, but I got to tell you, it's the best run company.
Oh, they're incredible.
I've ever experienced. My boss, a guy named Bobby Cute, his attention to detail was extraordinary. I think at some point, maybe they wanted me to step up, but there was no way I could do it there. I couldn't do it like they needed it done, and the way they needed it done was 24/7, 365. Every detail matters. The discipline, the rigor.
It's another Xerox. Listen, there's nothing wrong with their way. You just don't fit.
Well, at this point,
who cares?
I'm still ambitious. I'm still slightly insecure, but I'm just not interested in working like that. So I lasted for 3 years, Seth. And here's a funny story people don't know about.
Was it tell the story.
So I just wasn't having fun. I said, I'm going to retire. I'm going to retire. It's been great. I love you guys. You made me wealthy. Thank you very much. I love you. I'm just going to retire. They were so paranoid that I was going to start up another business and go into competition with them that they said, you can't quit. We're going to keep you on the payroll. And I said, you don't have to do that. I'm not going to take I'm grateful to you. Do you understand what I'm saying? Seth, they paid me for the next 3 years. Full boat. Salary, bonus. I mean, it was so I could stay on the bench. I took it. But I will never understand why they did that. So that's kind of crazy, isn't it?
No, I understand why they did it. How were you in that time? How did that?
Well, that's when I went to work with Mike Rothman to do SMS,
Exactly.
So I was prohibited from working in the industry. Mike's vision for SMS was different. It was all about small sites. They didn't care about small sites. And in fact, they were one of SMS's first investors. They gave us $10 million of seed money. Because I told them, I said, look, this is incredible. If this works, you should have a position in it. But you can imagine, and if anybody knows Mike in the audience, Mike is the single most potent entrepreneur I have ever met in my entire life. I have the deepest respect for him. But talk about a non-conforming personality. And he and
Mike, we love Mike. By the way, we love you.
Yeah, we love you, man. You're unbelievable. Thank you, brother. But the conflict was constant.
I'm sure.
And eventually they just said, look, Compass was like, they got a nice return, but they got out. They got out too early.
They did from a return perspective, but it is what it is with board management, investor management. Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, that was a very interesting time.
Yeah. So talk about the journey at SMS.
Matt McCall, right? Matt McCall was the head of Pritzker Ventures. He and I had served on another board together, a tiny little company founded by a friend of ours. And he said, John, if you ever see a great investment, particularly if you're involved, I'd love to back it. So I told him about SMS, and I said, man, I think this is it. I think this is the one. I think this is the opportunity. And he met Mike and he heard the story. And they stepped in immediately, Seth, at $100 million valuation, a valuation that far exceeded the company's then value. But I think they saw what we saw, an opportunity to really scale a super inefficient industry.
Yep.
And Pritzker was incredibly helpful. JB was Mike's mentor, throughout this process. Yep. So that for me, I had a very minor role in the firm. I want to be very, very clear about this. This was the Mike Rothman show, and this incredible team he built. But, I was helpful, right? I was a face to the world. I could help help the organization stay a little more measured.
Yeah.
But it was really Mike.
It was magical. I was talking to Mike just a few weeks ago. We were just catching up. I love what he's doing now. I love catching up. I love
his determination.
It's amazing.
I think let's just break for a minute on the subject of Mike Rothman. I think it's worth spending 5 minutes on, right?
Let's do it.
So in my life, I have never met anyone like him. And I think this is really
I agree.
This is a good example of why entrepreneurs are entrepreneurs, because he would be a caged lion in any other environment. If he couldn't be him, his life would be filled with conflict and unresolved conflict. And he certainly wouldn't be as wealthy as he is today. But his gifts, his clarity, and his determination, how else would you, what are the other words to describe this unique human being, this wonderful human being?
He's a wonderful human being. And no, you got it. And it's, Mike is singular.
Singular. Okay. How do we skip this? Work ethic. 100 hours a week? No problem.
Just relentless. And here's the most important thing. He is fully self-aware. He is fully self-actualized. He is happy.
Yeah.
He is loved.
Yeah.
His children love him.
Adore him.
The grandchildren, I haven't seen him interact with the grandchildren, but I know he's trying to spend more time with them. And so through that self-awareness, and he selected the right spouse, the right friends, the right team.
Well, his partner, Pritzker. Yeah, I'm telling you,
everyone, and so
Matt McCall.
And so I think that's the other thing that's really interesting about Mike is he knew how to surround himself with the right people so that he could be 100% unapologetic, about who he is. That self-awareness combined with the drive and everything else, it's and the self-acceptance.
Okay, here's one other thing. Let's not forget about this. If he guesses wrong, it takes no time for you to wash out. And I think there's a lesson in that, Seth, because we all tend to hold people too long.
Yep.
Right? And I'm not speaking ill of Michael, but if Michael hires somebody, determines they're the wrong fit, boom, they're gone. And in a demanding, entrepreneurial environment, I tell you, it was required.
Absolutely necessary.
Yeah.
So you said something that I want to go back to. And you said something about self-esteem. Can you, how's your self-esteem?
Yeah. Well, I mean, no, look, one of the reasons I didn't advance as quickly as I thought I should at Xerox was I was arrogant. And I had more than one boss tell me I was arrogant, which...
Were you arrogant?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
And I was absolutely uninterested in the feedback, and it wasn't until I learned that it was this whole thing is not about you. Until you really understand that, you're hopeless. It's not about you, right? It's never been about you. So I use that phrase, ambitious and slightly insecure, as a way to signal, Seth, that I had become more self-aware. And so I wanted to feel ambitious. It's fun to win. Remember we talked about winning? But also I didn't want to assume I had all the answers. So happily feeling slightly insecure.
What created the pivot?
Oh, I'm sure I got my teeth kicked in somewhere.
That's true.
All right. So when you get sick, you either become a bigger prick or a better human being.
Yeah.
So the first time I got sick, I made myself a promise. I said, as long as I live, I am never going to get angry. That was 20 years ago. I can't tell you the last time I've been angry. And that's great because it really pisses off people who do get angry. It's a really powerful thing. And I think that was the start of that journey, right? Just, what anger is horrible. So it destroys intimacy. Yeah. It's one of the worst emotions. And I know that everybody doesn't agree with that, but it certainly was my truth. And I think that was the catalyst because, again, it's sort of another plank in a platform where it's, why are you angry?
Yeah.
The second time I got sick, you got to up the commitment.
Yeah.
So I said, I am not going to complain about anything for as long as I live. Turns out that's much harder.
That's hard. That's a hard one.
It's impossible, but it does force you to be creative. Like the other day I was on a business trip and my flight got canceled. Yeah. So I was calling home to report on how things were going. And I said, well, my flight got canceled, but it's really okay because it gave me a chance to spend another night in this tidy airport hotel. And if I'm fortunate, I'll get to enjoy another delicious room service meal. And if I'm really lucky, my sister's going to call me to complain about the indignities foisted on the president by the liberal media. You see what I mean, Seth? It's very difficult.
It's very difficult. Yes.
To complain.
Yeah.
So I think I'm probably like 80%.
That's pretty good though. That's pretty darn good. And so now you're going to retire again.
Yeah.
And what does that look like?
Oh, it's going to be great. So remember, I'm not leaving ISSA. I'm just leaving the day-to-day responsibility.
Yes.
And I'm going to turn it over to a very talented executive. Yeah. And I'm going to serve at the pleasure of that executive.
It's wonderful.
That's what my predecessor did. He was a Marine, by the way, and had a deep appreciation for the chain of command. Great lesson for me. Not that there was ever going to be any conflict because I'm resolved to be in a support role.
Yeah.
But I serve on boards. I love doing that. I'm on a half a dozen boards. A few are PE backed, but a few are just really cool young entrepreneurs who have an idea and are trying to figure out how to do it. And they're both, for me, endlessly interesting. And what Seth would tell you is, there is this club, right? And if you're on the board of a PE sponsored company, there's a whole thing about that. Very hard to break into.
Yeah.
But once you're in, and you've had a couple of good exits, your phone rings a lot. So you get a lot of those opportunities.
Yeah.
And I love those, Seth, but not every private equity company is the same. Not every opportunity is the same. So you end up being pretty discerning about that.
Yeah.
I have a really hard time saying no to young entrepreneurs who search for me on LinkedIn, track me down, send me videos, which in fact is how most of these have happened. And they suck me in. And it's so much fun.
Yeah.
Because what we're talking about here, that's the ultimate reward, right?
Yeah, that's right.
I refuse to use the term give back. That's silly.
Yeah.
But it's a chance to, what am I, help me out with this. What am I looking? It's so much more. It's so much more.
Yeah, it is so much more. I think of all of the companies as my children.
Yeah. Yeah.
I really do. And, I don't want them to have to go through the pain.
That's it. That's
right?
it. It's exactly like your kids, right?
Yeah. It's like if I can get you there faster with less pain, if I can get you to, if we can enjoy the journey more, if I can get you to like not step on the rakes that I already stepped on, right? It's like it's passing that down is really, really, and then getting out of the way.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't take that much time.
No.
You're not running the business. You're advising an entrepreneur. It's a totally different thing.
And it's very selfless. Right?
It feels selfish. I used to give my mom a hard time about this. I said, Ma, you do so many nice things for people because it makes you feel good. See how selfish you are? But in addition, Seth, I would to finish the answer, I also have 7 children. You know, my wife and I have 7 kids, combined families.
Yeah.
They're all grown up.
Yeah.
Most of them are married. They're starting to have families. And I do hope that I make more than enough time to tell my grandchildren how they should manage their parents.
Yes, of course. Of course.
I
think you're going to do a really good job. I'm excited. Right? I'm excited for that. Well, listen.
Because you got to manage your parents.
You do. Well, I got to thank you. This is the first podcast you've ever done. Was it super painful or was it okay?
Well, I love the sound of my own voice. So there's that. But Seth, you're an important person in my life. Oh. When you invited me to do this, I thought, wow, that might be interesting. Well, we always have fun when we're together and the time flies. Yeah. But thank you for the opportunity to share my story. I hope somebody finds it interesting at some level, but it was beautiful for me to share this hour with you.
Likewise. Thank you so much. And I'll see you soon at breakfast.
Yeah, right on.